The Joe Rogan Experience.
What happens when you become president? What do you think happens?
Yeah.
And why do you think that they're full of shit and they're just saying what we want to hear so they can get elected? Or do you think that there is something that happens to them once they get into office? Do you think that it's possible that they're given information that shows the real threats that the world has, and there's things that the general public is just not privy to, and these are what influences people's decisions to go against all the things that they were saying when they were running for president?
Yeah. Look, I haven't been with them and been in those rooms, so I won't speak for that which I do not know. But what I do know is this is what happens when you have people who are elected to serve in this job as president, whose most important responsibility is commander-in-chief, and they lack the experience and the understanding to be able to make the right kinds of decisions that serve the American people, and end up, even those going in with the best of intentions, end up being very influenced, whether it be by the military-industrial complex or the foreign policy establishment that, as we've seen over decades, has crossed both political parties. Both political parties in these areas often end up making the very same decisions about continuing these wasteful regime change wars and acting as the world's police, and therefore listening to them because they lack that experience or that backbone and understanding themselves, and then just continue the status quo. Trump was somebody who during his campaign talked a lot about ending the stupid wars, talked about going after Saudi Arabia, that they're the biggest supporters of terrorism in the world. And, what happened now? In his administration, what he called draining the swamp, he's turned that swamp into a cesspool. You look at the people he surrounded himself by, some of the biggest war hawks that our country has seen, guys like John Bolton, people like Mike Pompeo, people who've wanted to go to war against Iran for a very long time, people who have been cozy with Saudi Arabia for a very long time. You see who he's nominating to be Secretary of Defense, long-time defense contract career man, like over 30 years, I think, working for Boeing. You see the kinds of people who he's surrounded himself by. And so it doesn't take a lot to figure out how he has been influenced by them in continuing these regime change wars. This regime change is still going on in Syria now, threatening regime change in Venezuela, threatening regime change and disruption in Iran. And that's the difference. That's the difference, quite bluntly, between me and other people who are running for president, is that experience and understanding that I bring to be able to walk into that office, to do that job as commander-in-chief on day one, and to not succumb to the establishment that I have both felt the effects of as a soldier, as well as seen in action as a member of Congress. I'm going in with both eyes wide open and understanding the situation as it really exists, and most importantly, understanding who I work for, that I work for the American people.
Do you think when someone like Trump radically shifts his position, he's doing so because he's been influenced to change his position, because he's been given more information, or do you think they become compromised when they're in office and I scratch your back, you scratch mine?
I don't know. I imagine that there's probably some of both. But if you don't have the strength of your convictions and your understanding about what kinds of policies actually best serve the American people, then you can see how easily you'd be swayed and influenced by others. You saw Trump's rhetoric on the campaign trail about Saudi Arabia, against United States support for Saudi Arabia, calling them out for what they are, and now refusing to end U.S. military support for this genocidal war in Yemen that Saudi Arabia is waging, that's created the worst humanitarian crisis of our generation, because he says, well, he doesn't want to risk a multi-billion-dollar arms deal with Saudi Arabia. So, you can see, at least in that respect, what he's really motivated by. That he would rather continue to support the senseless and devastating deaths of innocent people in Yemen, and using our U.S. military, my brothers and sisters in the military, to do that, because he doesn't want to risk an arms deal with Saudi Arabia, a theocratic dictatorship that actually directly supports terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda.
It's hard for people to imagine that that's the case, that it's an arms deal and they want to make sure that this deal goes through and that it continues to be financially productive for both nations.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's, this was Trump's argument. He's like, well, that's American jobs, building those weapons that we're selling to Saudi Arabia. That's what's at risk. My challenge to him and to the American people is, if the best our president can do to help support the creation of jobs in this country is to build weapons that are being dropped on innocent people in countries like Yemen, then we need a new president. We need a new commander-in-chief that will actually help serve the best interests of our people and work towards the interests of peace here at home and peace abroad.
Yeah, the idea that it's just jobs. It's not just jobs.
No.
I mean, there's consequences to these jobs.